is God as love? Is it a front yard sign of pure affirmation and embrace? Or how do these things relate in God? Is it better than how it relates in us as a culture usually?
Yeah. And I mean, it's really the question of the relationship between God's love and God's justice and God's mercy, right? And how, I think of, I don't know who originally said this. It usually gets ascribed to Cornel West about how, justice is love in public, right? And so the public face of love is justice. Yeah. And I quote a line from Martin Luther King in the book where he talks about, the God of Christians is great enough that he can be both, tenderhearted and strong-minded, and that, the God of love is not a wishy-washy God. That genuine, I mean, I think as any parent knows, genuine love sometimes requires having to tell people things that they don't want to hear. Right. And, but one of the things I've noted that, I sometimes think that, speaking as a Roman Catholic, that it's sort of has become the vocation of the Catholic Church in modernity to say no. Right. All sorts of things in our culture, and the Catholic Church is casting the role of saying no. But I think, and maybe in that can be a perfectly valid cultural role to be, like, well, let's tap the brakes here.
Right.
But I think there's a difference between people who say no with a certain sorrow, knowing that even though it's the right thing to tell somebody, like, the way you're living your life is not correct, or you can't have this thing that you want. It's one thing to say that with a certain sorrow because you know that this is, bringing a certain pain and suffering to this person that might be ultimately salutary, but there's still pain and suffering there. And then there's those people who just delight in saying no, right? Sure, and the danger then is, you begin to attract the people who just like saying no. And so I do think that if God is love, then I think part of what that means is that when you say no in a way that is, going to cause people a certain amount of grief, you need to be willing to share that grief, right? If you're going to say the church has this teaching on whatever it is, sexuality, economics, I mean, it could be any number of things, that it's going to require them to say no to the culture, you've got to be willing to share the pain that people feel being denied these things.